and Minister, last Friday in the very early hours of the morning, a serious fire broke out in the Auburn Park apartments in Castleknock in my constituency. I know you know Castleknock, Minister, so you're probably aware of this apartment block. The fire was significant. There were up to 4 fire engines called, dispatched to bring it under control. At least one person was taken to hospital with smoke inhalation. And hundreds of people, all the residents of this block of apartment, had to be evacuated from it in order to control the fire. And now significant damage has been done to the roof of the complex, and a number of the apartments on the top floors are directly exposed, and others have suffered severe water damage as a result of the efforts to extinguish the fire. All 45 apartments in the complex are currently vacant. Most of the residents were accommodated in a hotel on the night of the fire, and most have been in that local hotel since then. So locals in the area are working to assist those who are evacuated, particularly those whose apartments were severely damaged. But Minister, the key point for me this morning is what happens next. All bar 9 of the 45 apartments are owned by a property group and are leased out by that group. And shockingly, earlier this week, many of the residents were told that they were having their tenancy terminated due to the units being uninhabitable. And you can imagine the shock that that created on top of a fire, to be told their tenancy gone just like that. Now, thankfully, that notice of the termination of tenancy has now been withdrawn by the property group, and that's something I welcome. But there is still real concern among these tenants. They've been told that they have an hour-long slot, 1 hour, Minister, to go into their apartments, gather up all their stuff and take them out, like anybody could pack up their entire lives in just 1 hour. So right now, the residents have accommodation in a hotel, but that hotel accommodation ends Thursday, tomorrow, and after that there's no clarity about how these residents are going to be supported. So, Minister, I have a number of questions that the residents really need answered urgently to give them some guidance about what happens next. So first of all, can a landlord terminate a tenancy on the basis of a unit being uninhabitable? And is there any restriction on a landlord doing that? Secondly, if a landlord does terminate a tenancy on the basis of a unit being uninhabitable, does the landlord owe the tenant any other duties after doing that? Secondly then, when a unit has been damaged but the tenancy has not been terminated, what duties does a landlord owe a tenant in that particular situation? So, for example, does the landlord have any duty to find alternative accommodation for the tenant? Does the landlord have any responsibilities as regards assisting the tenant finding and paying for storage for their personal items? And finally then, if a landlord does not provide alternative accommodation in a circumstance where a unit is currently badly damaged, where else can the tenant get help from? Does the local authority own any obligations there? Does any other parts of the state owe obligations in that particular situation? Minister, these are detailed questions. I recognise you're not the line minister here, but they really, really need to be answered. And they need to be answered urgently, because tenants in the vast majority of these homes are looking at a deadline of tomorrow, where their current accommodation in a hotel is paid up till tomorrow and no further. They need to know what to do. I'm working to support them. I know Deputy Emer Curry has been engaged with them and has been giving a lot of help as well. But if we can get some, I suppose, key answers about the legal responsibilities here, know some clarity on that point, it will at least help guide the tenants to a certain degree. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks, Deputy O'Gorman, for raising this morning. And I want to join with yourself as well in recognising the distress that the tenants are experiencing as a result of this very traumatic event, and also recognise your advocacy on their behalf, and indeed the very stressful situation that they remain in as a result of no longer being in their apartments. I'm taking this morning on behalf of the Minister for Housing and Department of Housing. I know you've raised a number of very pertinent and urgent questions there in your contribution, which I certainly will ask the Department to revert directly to you on to have answered. The Minister also was concerned to learn of the fire at the Auburn Park apartments last week, and he likewise very much appreciates the distress experienced by the residents and the families affected by the fire. The role of the Department of Housing is to ensure a framework of policy, legislation and funding is provided to ensure that housing authorities are in a position to address homelessness at a local level. Statutory responsibility for the provision and coordination of emergency accommodation rests with the local authorities, and it is the responsibility of local authorities, and in this instance Fingal County Council, to assess individual needs and to deliver supports on the ground, including housing needs assessments, the provision of emergency accommodation and any homelessness supports required for residents affected. The local authority will work with other agencies such as Dublin Fire Brigade, the Department of Social Protection, HSE and approved housing bodies where appropriate to ensure all necessary supports are put in place. I can also assure you, Deputy, on behalf of Minister Brown and the Department of Housing, that they will continue to support Fingal County Council with the funding necessary to ensure that residents of Auburn Park are supported in accessing housing assistance where appropriate in the weeks ahead. This year, over €563 million has been allocated to homeless services, ensuring that local authorities such as Fingal County Council have the resources required to respond rapidly to situations like this. This includes over €513 million in current funding to ensure that local authorities can provide emergency accommodation, homeless prevention and tenancy sustainment services to households experiencing or at risk of homelessness, and that these households in emergency accommodation are supported to exit homelessness as quickly as possible. The focus is ensuring rapid access to emergency accommodation, followed by wraparound supports and pathways back into secure housing. Supporting individuals and families facing homelessness is a key priority for both the Minister and the Government, and prevention of homelessness in the first instance is an absolute priority. There are many prevention initiatives already underway in the Department and across Government, and this includes the provision of social affordable housing, HAP and homeless HAP, and our strong tenancy protection legislation. Increased supply is key to addressing homelessness, of course, as well, and the Government are investing significantly in that aspect. But listen, I know today, Deputy O'Gorman, your particular question is in relation to the need for urgent support for the residents of the Auburn Park apartments and the very distressing situation they find them in. I know Fingal County Council will be liaising closely with them, the Department of Housing here, and their response today are making it clear that from a funding point of view they stand ready to work with Fingal County Council and other agencies in relation to trying to support residents to work through this particular challenging situation. I know the questions you've raised today are very pertinent for residents at the moment in relation to the obligations that there are from the owners of the apartments to them, and also the legal questions you've put as well in relation to what those obligations are. I will ask the Department to revert directly to you with those answers, and certainly again share the really difficult situation these residents find themselves in, and the importance of everyone within the state and all of our agencies working to support them through this difficult period.
Thanks, Minister, and thanks for your response. And I know in topicals in these debates we often always say, oh, I'll ask the Minister to get back to you. I really appeal to you, would you ask your private sec just to get on to the Minister's private sec, bring this to his attention. It's just, and I know you will, and I appreciate that. And I know I put a lot of very specific questions to you, and the answer you've given me here is a more generalised one, and that's fine, but these specific questions do need to be answered, because the focus of the reply is very much on the question of homelessness. And let's be honest, these people are homeless right now, or they are. Some of them, their units aren't usable at all. Some probably are usable after a bit of work. And you talked about the government were willing to support Fingal in terms of providing homeless services. And look, I know our local authority works well. But I am interested in the responsibility of the landlord here, because we're not talking about a small landlord. We're not talking about someone who has 2 or 3 apartments that they let out. This is a significant property development, property rental company that has a significant number of units around the city and around the country. And I just be honest, I don't know what their responsibility is in a situation like this. Like, do they have a responsibility to have some degree of insurance if something happens in one of their properties, to be able to support tenants if a disastrous situation like this occurs? So clarity on the immediate obligations of this landlord company to their tenants. Do they have to support them in terms of providing alternative accommodation? How long will that last for? Or, as seems to be the case right now, are these tenants provided for up until tomorrow, and then they have to fend for themselves? Because if that's the case, you know, I think there's something very significantly wrong with the legislative framework that we have in place. So, Minister, thank you for your answer, and I would appeal to you, raise this with the Minister for Housing and ask him to revert to me and other deputies, say Deputy Curry, as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy O'Gorman, and I can assure you I will relay this immediately back to the Department of Housing and to the Minister for Housing and ask them to respond directly to you in relation to these really important questions you've put. I understand the real stress that residents are experiencing, whereby they're not clear on what the situation is or the obligations for support to them after the hotel accommodation runs out tomorrow, and that immediate challenge for them. Obviously, in terms of the landlord, it's important that there's clarity, legal clarity, in relation to what their obligations are. It would be important to see that accommodation come back into and be available again as quickly as possible in terms of the repair and the differing levels of damage that there will be to each apartment. I've no doubt for most of the residents their objective would be to be, if at all possible, to be back in their apartments as quickly as they possibly can be. Obviously, the short-term and the interim piece in relation to how they're supported through this, the obligations of the apartment owner in relation to that is going to be important, that there's that clarity, and also then as well from a state point of view, Fingal County Council and state agencies working to support them in the interim period is important here too. So I will ask the Department and the Minister to revert directly to you on the questions you've raised today. Thank you.